life growing up. I struggled a lot too, my earlier years. Her and I met. I was engaged to a young lady in high school and throughout high school, and it didn't work out. I dated another gal. That didn't work out. So I told my dad one morning in men's prayer meeting, I said, I'm done. I'm not going to ask any more women out. I said, I am terrible at picking them out. I said, I'm praying that God will send the right one to me and she'll call and ask me out. My dad got real nervous at that. Dad's like, well, I don't know about that. He said, I told him, I said, don't. I said, calm down. I said, you lay a fleece out on the ground and you say you want it dry, it's dry. You want it wet, it's wet. I said, that's the God that I read about. That's the God you taught me about. Dad said, all right. He said, we'll be praying together. So the men's prayer meeting, we started praying about it. Wound up one day at lunch. I come back from lunch and my dad had the phone in his hand. He's like, there's a girl on here. He called wanting to talk to you. It wound up being the cousin to the other two girls I dated, oddly enough, and it was Deanne. We've been married 27 years. She already had a baby, out of wedlock. She never got married. Her family was poor. They were dirt poor growing up. So the clothes that she had were hand-me-downs, most of them, and they shared clothes too. A lot of her family members. I remember I used to get on to her about her clothes. I always made remarks about them, not being real fond of the way she dressed and everything. And I told her, I was like, you sure you won't wear that? She told me finally one day, she goes, when you start buying my clothes, then you can say something about how I dress. All right. Well, I didn't have a lot of money, so I started working a lot of extra jobs and saving up money. Never said a word. I took her out one Friday night out to Terre Haute to eat, and we went shopping. I bought her a bunch of clothes. We get back home. I carried them upstairs to her bedroom. I laid them on the bed. Turned around, opened her closet. I grabbed all of her clothes. What are you doing? I just bought your clothes. Now I got some say in the way you're dressing. These are going to the back of my truck. I like to say it went out over real well, but it didn't. Not like I had it planned out in my head, but we worked through that. So we decided after I raised Emily, our oldest daughter, just like my own. Later, we decided we wanted to have another daughter. So we wound up trying, we had Maddie. But before Maddie came out, Maddie was one of two twins. A lot of people don't know that. She had a lot of complications, spent a lot of nights in the hospital overnight, run up a pretty good sized hospital bill. We didn't even think nothing about it. She miscarried and lost her one baby. And so in doing this, we were kind of worried about Maddie. Maddie come out premature, but she was in good health, didn't have no fingernails, and she was tiny. When she come out, and the day they sent her home, they told us, they said, the outfits you brought won't fit her, they're way too big. So when I left the hospital, I went by and I held my hand on Maddie's chest. I was tasked with finding an outfit. The only outfit I could find was on our oldest daughter Emily's baby doll laying in the bedroom floor the night when I left. I looked at it and I thought, well, that's the same size as that kid at the hospital. So I took the outfit off that toy doll, and that's what Maddie come home from the hospital. So it wasn't just probably about a month or two, maybe a little longer than that later, my in-law's house burnt down. So my mother-in-law, my father-in-law, my brother-in-law moved in with Deanne and I and two kids in a house trailer. We did have a room addition on the back, and so we were pretty tight for money trying to support. I was the only one working, trying to support all of them. I worked all the hours. I worked Saturdays. I had other jobs that I would go work at. I didn't just work for my family. And come home one day and she was sitting there crying. I was like, Myra, she said, we got that bill in the hospital from when Maddie was born. Well, what's the matter? She goes, insurance. We don't have insurance. They're not going to cover it. I sat down. I cried with her for a while. It wound up being 13,000, a little over 13 grand. I can't remember that number, but her grandpa must have been eavesdropping. He heard us sitting there praying. We prayed, and we just left that over to the Lord, and we told the Lord her grandparents weren't Christian. We told the Lord, do what you have to do and provide a way. I figured that he would provide work for me, and I would go out and work somewhere, or somebody would come up and help us, and I'd owe them money, or hospital. You don't know. Wound up, a couple days later, I come home, her grandparents, he met me outside. He said, hey, I heard you guys in there crying the other night about a hospital. He said, my insurance company said they would pay to have that burnt house cleaned up. I said, well, are you willing to clean that up? Yeah, I mean, it's money. I need it. Well, I said, how much they're going to pay me? He fumbled around. He pulled out a pocket. And he goes, oh, right there it is. And he handed it to me. 3 days before that, I had called the hospital, and they had told me that if I could pay that bill in 30 days, that they would take half of what the hospital bill was. I opened that paper up, and it was $6,780, exactly half of what that hospital. And he told me that they would write me out a check the day I had that house cleaned up in 2 weeks. My dad had a dump truck and a backhoe. We went up there. I cleaned up. He hauled, and my dad helped me. 2 weeks, we paid that hospital bill by the grace of God. God provided a way where there wasn't a way. We go on. Lord blessed my grandparents, or her grandparents, my in-laws. They wound up having a decent place to live after that. They had good insurance. You would think that would have clicked with me, but my dad got hurt at work one time. We had a welding shop and a machine shop in Linton. I grew up in that shop. I started welding when I was 6 years old, working on equipment. My dad got hurt real bad, and they had to lifeline him out one time. He got hit in the head real hard. And the day they took him out, my brothers was going to close the shop. They didn't know what to do. And I told them, I said, we can't close the shop. Dad won't have any income. He won't have no insurance. They're like, well, we don't know what. I said, I'll take it. I'll start running it if I have to. I was only 19 or so when this happened. And we took over the shop. I started running it, waiting on Dad to get out. When my dad got out of the hospital and recovered, he told me, he said, you run it a little bit different than I do. I'm going to let you go ahead and run it. He goes, people seem to like the way you do it. And he said, so, and not to say nothing about my dad, but my dad was a little hard-headed and he was a little bit grouchy. So I took over and started running it. Eventually, I wound up taking over the whole family business. And we had one night a fire. And sadly enough, I didn't have enough health or life fire insurance. Wound up, it was not a total loss, but we recovered a lot of the equipment. But there was over $500,000 worth of equipment in there that didn't belong to me. By the grace of God, I had customers that were willing to turn it in on their insurance and help me out. So I took out second mortgage on 58 acres that I had, and we just built a brand new home right in the middle of it and moved into it 2 weeks after that shop burnt down. There I had to make a mortgage payment. With half the employees, we started over again in the back building I had, and half the income. Needless to say, we started fighting and struggling, going backwards. We prayed about it and prayed about it. The night that I was standing out there watching the shop burn, a good friend of mine, it was a pastor, he told me about a week before that, he said, I was praying, and the Lord told me you had a storm coming. Because I don't know what it is. He said, you read that tonight. He said that you got to mount up with wings like an eagle. He goes, an eagle's wings are designed where they can lock and they can fly over top of a storm. Its body's made to where it can fly at heights that nothing else can. And he goes, you're going to have to fly over this storm and overcome it. He goes, and it's only by the grace of God that you're going to be able to make it through all. Well, I didn't know what he was talking about, but the night of that fire, I'm standing there watching my building burn, and I called him and got his answer machine. I was like, hey, I found that storm that you was talking about, and I told him what was going on, and he seen it on the news. He called me later. He's like, it's exactly. He goes, I remember telling you that. He said, what are you going to do? And I said, God will provide a way. He always does. So we took out the second mortgage on our place, started again, and we fought and struggled for probably about 6 or 7 years, and it wasn't taking off. It wasn't gaining ground like it was. We was actually losing ground. So I was sitting there one day and praying about it, and I was like, God, I don't know what in the world to do. I have done everything. I've tried living my life above reproach. I feel like I'm going backwards. I just, it don't make sense to me. And I know that I believe in my heart that you're going to answer my prayers, but I don't see it happening. And I spent countless hours throughout the week on my knees in the middle of my shop floor of the morning before I'd open, just in prayer. My office covered in Christian posters. I had people that would sneak in and take pictures. I played Christian music all the time. I wouldn't let my customers use foul language or my employees. I'd get on to them and say something. I was very bold, and everybody in town knew how I felt about it. Well, one day, this guy come in, stacked papers, said he was with the IRS. Asked, can I help you? He goes, yeah. He goes, you're closed for business. I'm like, what do you mean I'm closed? Well, he says, you messed up on your taxes. You made a crucial mistake. And I was like, what are you talking about? He goes, you didn't pay your payroll tax. What? Yeah, he goes, you didn't pay your payroll tax last year. I'm like, no, my accountant told me to skip it, and I'd take a late penalty, and I used that money to help start over again. He said, yeah. He said, that was the nail in your coffin. I skipped the $12,000 payment. They charged me $109,000 interest the first year on that. And I thought, well, you know what? This is crazy. I don't want to close. He goes, you don't understand. You're broke, and you just don't know it. What are you talking about? We get done talking. He leaves. I called Deanne, and she's like, I was just getting ready to call you. She says, I've been getting phone calls all morning. Every check that we have sent out has come back bounced. She said, I just checked every account that we have. Been drained. We are flat broke and in the hole. I'm like, oh my goodness. We had a pretty good size amount put back. That was my retirement that we'd been saving over the years. They even took Maddie's $13 out of her bank account she had because Deanne's name was. That's how serious. And at first, I got really mad at them. I mean, I was pretty upset. I'm not gonna lie. And once I got past it, I got to thinking about it. And I was like, well, you know what? I did. I broke the law. I didn't pay payment. And just like Christ told us, give unto Caesar what is Caesar. I mean, he gave a good example when he told Peter to go out and get the fish and take the 2 coins out of his mouth and pay their taxes. I was thinking about that, and I was like, I had this coming. So I didn't know what I was going to do. So for the next year, I had to let all my employees go. That included all my family. I'll tell you right now, that'll put a hard ripple between you and your family when you have to fire your dad and your brother. So I worked for cash money for the next year. The IRS knew what I was doing. Every time it was, I forget how many days apart, they would hit my bank accounts, take every penny I had, so I couldn't keep any money in the bank. And I struggled hard in prayer, not knowing what to do. And finally, one day I had a meltdown one morning praying, and I told the Lord, I said, God, what am I doing wrong? And he said, that question I've been waiting for. He goes, you don't belong here. I said, what do you mean? He said, I never called you to do this. This is not your calling in life. Not? He goes, no. He said, you're gifted at it. He goes, but I gift you at a lot of other things. But he goes, you're not called to be here. He says, this was your dad's call. He goes, to teach you. He goes, 40 years I've been teaching. And he said, now it's time for you to move on. Let it go. I was like, so what do I need to do? He said, close this place. Move on. Oh my goodness. I called her. I was like, hey, we're going to have to quit. She's like, what are we going to do? I was like, oh, there was work that we didn't even get to finish. It got down so bad that they'd repoed some of our stuff. They didn't foreclose on our home. When we decided, I don't know if any of y'all have ever sold equipment or anything, you try and liquidate stuff, it gets drug out sometimes forever. I ran an ad because I needed the money bad and tried selling one old junk forklift that didn't run. The guy come to look at it. He's like, why are you selling this? And I told him what was going on. He goes, are you going to sell any other stuff? I was like, might as well. I mean, I'm losing everything now. I've done broke. I don't know what else to do. I was like, go in that building and look around. I mean, I didn't even have power on it right at that time. The city had cut my utilities. We took flashlights and went in there, and he looked around. He come back out with a piece of paper and ink pen. He goes, there's the stuff I want. He goes, there's what I'll give you for it. And I'm like, I'll figure out how to get the door open. We'll load it up. Three people bought everything that I owned in that building within a week and a half. And I never advertised a single piece. That's not normal. That's way, because this is obscure equipment. It's not just normal equipment. So the Lord did that. And in turn, I don't know if any of you know Jason Byers, but he's a Mennonite from Worthington. He's a good friend. He bought a chunk of it, and he has now, it has blessed his family and his children, and they have a welding shop and machine shop in Worthington. He was one of them that bought it. And so we closed up everything. I used that money to keep paying on the house, trying to keep the bank from foreclosing because I didn't have nowhere to go. And sadly enough, like I said, I fell on the skid with my family because I had to close the family business, so that didn't go over real good. So in the meantime, I needed an income. So I went to work for a friend. He had a septic system repair service. We went out repairing sewer systems, which is, if y'all have never done that, you don't want to do it. Horrible. God told me that he had me there for a reason. It was only for $15 an hour, and it was the nastiest thing I've ever done in my life. The last job I did for him, I crawled through probably 3 to 6 inches of human sewage underneath the house, my hands and knees, and fixed a broken sewer line. And the whole time I'm doing it, the Lord was like, you think about Jeremiah and them prophets, the ones that got dropped down in the cistern and were left there for days. People sitting in dungeons, Paul and Peter. Like, man, that must be nasty. He's like, that's what you're crawling right now. He said, you've humbled yourself because you know that you're going down the path that I've chose for you. Stay true to it. So went on, and I come home from work one day, and Deanne, she said, hey, we got a problem. I said, what? She goes, you're only making $15 an hour. We need to figure out what you're going to do. I don't know what in the world to do. She said, let's sit down here. The Lord, I was praying. He told me to have you write out your dream job to the T. Like, what do you want to do? Time to grow up. Like, you already know. She goes, I know you want to be a heavy equipment mechanic. I said, yeah, I do. I said, I love working on stuff. She goes, all right, that's number one on the list. She said, I want good health insurance. She said, that's going to be number two on my list. She said, I want you to work for a stable company. And we went on down the list and made out a list, put uniforms on there, wanted a retirement plan, just different things. And that's what we started praying for. I come home one day, and this company I'd never had schooling on it. This company that I work for now, they offered, oddly enough, they started a school program where you're a full-time employee and they train you and you got all the benefits. 3 years ago, the last thing on that list was going out in a service truck. And that's where I went 3 years ago. Everything on that list, God had done. Everything. I was blown away and couldn't imagine. But when I started working there, we lived in Linton, which was an hour away. So in the meantime, we're struggling still trying to make our house payment. So we realized that the Lord's going to move us on from this house. So we started praying about it. And the Lord told us, He goes, you're not staying here. He says, I have something else for you to do. I told you, just like it says in Deuteronomy chapter 8, He goes, you follow me and do what I tell you to do. He goes, you're going to be blessed. But He said, don't, you'll wish you'd have never tried. Okay, so we listed our house. 2 years it was on the market. We had looked from Shoals to Vincennes at houses, had a list of houses that we thought would be in our price range. And we'd went and looked at several of them. Well, one of them in Washington, she'd fell in love with it. I couldn't stand the place. I wanted to live out in the country. I'd never lived in town since I was a little bitty kid. And I couldn't stand it because it was in town. Well, we went and walked through it. It's nice. I liked it. I mean, if it had been out in the country, I'd have been all for it, but it wasn't. And it seemed like it was going to be more than what I thought that we were going to get. And I just told her I was being sarcastic about it. And I was like, well, I'll just tell you what. You want that house? Tell God, not me. I said, He'll answer your prayer if you wholeheartedly believe it. That He's carried us all this way. Talk to Him. I can't do nothing about it. She goes, you know what? I will. She started praying. We went through that house and it went off the market that week, but it never did sell. Our house took, since it was tied into all that land, that 58 acres, that's a hard sell to sell. It took 2 years for our house to sell. When we were getting ready to sign papers on our house, we went back and looked, and every house on our list was gone. They had already sold. We didn't have nowhere to go. Didn't know what we were going to do. I'm coming home from work one day. Holy Spirit told me to turn and go up by that other house. And I was like, I don't want that stupid house. I said, I don't like that thing. It's in town. The Lord's like, I didn't ask you to drive by it. And I drove by and looked at it. He's like, it's a nice place, ain't it? I was like, yeah, it is. But I said, one, it's out of my price range. And two, it ain't for sale. Like, so there ain't nothing I can do about it. Several times over the next course of a few weeks, the Lord started dealing with my heart. Drive by that house. And I drove by one day and God said, stop, knock on the door, tell him you want to buy it. That's the craziest thing I ever heard. He goes, you just think about what I did last night. Oh man. Night before, a good friend of mine, he's my, not a Christian. He's rough. He is very rough. God blessed him somehow. He fell in and inherited some property, and a coal mine went under that. This guy has never had nothing growing up. He lived dirt poor, struggled his whole life. God blessed him. It's like the Beverly Hillbillies. He fell into a pile of money. He won't help nobody with nothing. I mean, he's tight. They were over at the house, and he told us, he goes, look, you guys ain't going to live in a shack. He goes, you've been too good to me my whole life. He said, you find a place and let me know how much money you. I'm like, what? He goes, you ain't got no credit. He goes, the bank done took all your stuff. You're selling your house. He says, they repoed all your cars. Everybody knows the IRS cleaned you out. He goes, ain't nobody going to loan you no money. He said, I don't know why I'm doing it. He goes, I don't like you half the time, but he goes, I'm going to help you. Are you serious? He goes, yeah. All right. That day I'm driving by that house, I pulled in the driveway and I went up and knocked on the door, and the lady comes to the door and I said, "Hey, I want to buy your house." She goes, "Well, I want to sell it to you." I was like, "But it ain't on the market." She goes, "We took it off the market because, well, we had it listed 2 years ago and this couple come through it." She said the day after they left, she goes, "I work for the sheriff's department. I'm scared to let anybody in the house." And she goes, "It scared me so bad that we took it off the market and I can't have nobody in the house. We knew we couldn't sell it." And I was like, "Well, I need to see inside of it. We've done been through it." And she goes, "No, you ain't." I said, "Yeah, that was me and my wife that went through there." She goes, "Oh, well, then I'll sell it to you. You seem like a nice guy." I called her husband that night. We're living in that house. Been living there since 2019. God opened the door. That's how we got our house. And my buddy, how it worked out, we set it up to where we paid them, and once every month, minimum, sometimes twice a month, we would go out to dinner with them. And I'm telling you right now, I didn't realize how much I could preach. That guy, I had him pinned down. I said he didn't have no choice if he wanted his money, but that listen to me. That's what happened. We went out with them, and some people got to meet them here. So the Lord blessed us in that way with our home. He blessed us with my job. Addie, she went to North Davie School. That's where she wanted to go to school at. We got moved down here. She graduated, started working, got her first tax check. She wanted to be an adult, so she wanted to move out. So she decided she was going to find her a place to move. She moved over to Shoals in an apartment and signed a year living over there. For the job that she had, they cut her hours back to nothing, so she wasn't being able to make it. And wasn't going to be able to make rent, and she realized it. She called, said, "Dad, I don't know what to do." Sometimes you got to give your kids a little bit of hard love. And I told her, I was like, "You're going to have to get a second job." I said, "You know, your mom worked 2 and 3 jobs when we first moved here trying to pay for our house," because I said, we had it tough. And I said, "You know, I worked days at one place and I worked nights and weekends at another. I worked 2 jobs for 5 years." She goes, "Yeah." Said, "That's what I'll do." So she got a job. She was barely making it. She was struggling. And she called me late one night. She's like, "Dad, I don't know how long I can keep doing this." I was like, "Have you talked to God about it?" She goes, "I have, but I don't know what to do." And I said, "Well, come over. We're going to sit down. We're going to pray about this. God's going to open the door for you." All right. So she come over that night. We sat down. We prayed. We prayed that the Lord would open the door. And I prayed that God would let her see his hand move in her life. The landlord told her that he wouldn't let her out of the lease. Wouldn't. And without paying a bunch of money. Well, Maddie didn't have it. Maddie calls me. "You ain't gonna believe this. The apartment next door, the window's been broke out of it for a good while. It's been raining in there, nasty." Said, I called the landlord and made a complaint about it. Told her I thought maybe I could smell mold or something. Said, "Come over and checked it out." Come over to my apartment and say, "Hey, I need you to move out." "Well, what about my lease?" Because if you move out within 30 days, you don't owe me a penny. Just get out and go. God freed her from that lease, from that apartment. She moved back home. Met a guy and moved in with him. It crushed us because I know that she was taught better than me. She knew it too. And she'd come over and we'd talk. And she's like, "I know, Dad, that I know how you feel. You've not been all over me about it." But she goes, "I know how you feel about this and how you feel about living together and not being married." I said, "Yeah." I said, "Because you're destroying the structure of what you could have had. You don't even know it." I said, "Your foundation can never be strong if you are living in sin." I know. But we started praying heavy for that. And I'll tell you, when you pray for your children and you pray that God moves in their lives, if you want to see effective prayers, don't tie God's hands. Her and I prayed one night several times that the Lord would do what he had to do to get Maddie back to God, regardless, even if it meant him having to take her. Wound up, Maddie developed migraines. She started having migraines. Started calling me. What causes migraines at work? We talked about it. I thought maybe it was a hard hat. I worked overhead, working at Toyota, and her out. She got real bad one night. She went to the ER. They X-rayed her. They found this dark mass in her head. So they got panicky. Well, they sent her in to have her CAT scan done. They come back and they told her she had a tumor on her spinal, about that big around, right on her spinal cord, right at the base of her brain. And also, she had an issue where her brain was almost too large for her skull. What caused pressure, and that was helping add to the headaches. So immediately they had her go down to Nashville, Tennessee. They come back, told us, they said, hey, she's going to have surgery and radiation and maybe even do some other treatments, but we can't operate on this thing and touch it. We'll have to try and kill it. All right, well, immediately I realized and told Dee, it's like, if God don't move and do something, this is terminal. I said, Maddie's as good as gone. And Maddie started losing her functions on the right side real quick. Hands wouldn't work, her leg wouldn't work. She got to where she couldn't walk, started having a lot of swelling. So she moved back home. Well, one night she wanted to come over to Goldie, took her to Dairy Queen to get ice cream. We're out riding around, and she would lose her memory. Told me, she said, she's sitting up front with me. She goes, I can't wait. When I go back to work, Dad, I'm going to do this. When I go back, I'm going to do that. And I just sitting there kind of quiet, and Maddie looked over at me. She goes, Dad, why are you so quiet? And I said, I just got a lot on my mind. She goes, you have never lied to me. She says, you told me you didn't care how hard the truth was, that you would be up and up with me growing up. And she goes, I don't think you've ever lied to me. She goes, I want the honest truth right now. She goes, am I dead? I said, kid, this is the third time I've told you this weekend. God don't change his mind. You're dying. You are already dead. You don't know it yet. She goes, that's what I thought. She said, I am terrified. I said, why are you scared? I mean, I'm not going to say I wouldn't have been in her shoes either. But she said, I'm going to hell, and I know it. I was like, well, it don't have to be that way. She said, well, what do I need to do? And I said, I can fix that right now. So I pulled over to her, Dee, and myself. We stopped right there, and we prayed with Maddie and had a talk with her. She gave her heart to God. Went back to work the next day, and I come home that night. I said, how you doing, sweetie? She said, I ain't scared at all. She said, I'm not. She said, I got a peace all over me. And she goes, I ain't saying I want to die, but she goes, if I do, I don't care at this point. She said, because I know that I'm going to heaven. I know I'm going to get to see Grandma and Grandpa. All right. Well, she went downhill pretty quick. She had surgery. They split the back of her skull open and spread it to try and relieve pressure. And when they did, that tumor just spread real quick. We got her home. They were wanting her to start radiation and all that soon. And Maddie told us, she goes, I don't want none of it till after the holidays. Well, then when the doctor found out, he called panicking. He's like, she won't make it that long without it. Well, Dee told the doctor the symptoms she was having. And the doctor's like, I got to call you back. Called back. He apologized. He said, we done missed our window. He said, if she's having all this, if everything had started getting worse and she started having trouble breathing, couldn't swallow, he said, she's probably going to be lucky if she has a few weeks, maybe a month. And he's like, so we're calling in some pain medicine to try and keep her content. They did. A couple days later, we wound up having to call hospice in. She was going downhill quick. By the time hospice come in, Maddie, she had started, when your body, when you get that on your spinal cord, you start cramping up and your body does weird things. And she started having a lot of pain. So she told me, she said, hey, I need you to pray with me again. I said, all right, what's going on, kiddo? She goes, I want you to pray that God will take me quick. Because I don't want to hurt. I don't want to suffer. She says, I just want it done and over with fast. It's a hard pill to swallow for a parent to pray that with a child. We sat down, and there were some other people over, and we prayed with her that the Lord would take her quick. And the hospice lady come in one day and seen her, and she realized that, told us later, she goes, she went outside and started crying. She lost it. She goes, I knew she only had probably a couple days left. And she wound up passing on November the 15th, about 3 o'clock in the morning, right there in our house, in our living room. They had a hospice bed brought in. And as she's fading off, she told me, she said, I need to keep that door open, that front door open. I was like, what's the matter? Just keep it open. She wouldn't ever tell us why. Well, then one of her friends was sitting in a chair over there, and she's like, man, I'm freezing to death sitting here. Well, we didn't have the door open, and we had the heater running, and it was hot in the house. And I couldn't figure out why she was cold. Well, then Maddie's boyfriend sat in that chair. Same thing. He kept claiming he was cold. Well, then after Maddie told me that, I was like, why do you want that door open? She goes, so the angels can get in and out of here. God had angels coming in tenderly. And she told me, she said, I think it's about time for me to leave. And she's going to talk to Mom. So Dee went over and spoke with her. And Maddie said, what are you going to do when I'm gone? She goes, I'll be all right. She goes, what are you going to do? She goes, I'll probably walk a lot or something just to keep my mind busy. And she goes, well, if you're good with it, she said, can I go? Because she said, I see like a grandpa. She said, where's Grandpa at? She goes, well, he just went and hid from me. She goes, but I see Emily's babies, or our other daughter, had been pregnant with twins and miscarried. And Patty said, seen them babies. She said, they're in heaven waiting on me. And she said, can I go be with all them now? She said, yeah. And that was the last thing that she'd said to us past that night, in the middle of the night. That's kind of it's a rough ordeal, but the thing is, and I told Maddie before she died, I said, Maddie, I cannot complain about this. I said, because you know, and I'm sorry in a way, but I said, you know that God answered your mom and dad's prayers. And she goes, I know. She said, I wasn't living right. And she said, you had no other way to get me into heaven but to pray. And she said, God's doing what he has to do to get me where he wants me. And she said, I'm not upset at all. She said, there's no way I should be upset. So Maddie passed, and I'm not going to say it went over real good. Dee kind of had a meltdown. We'd never been to the ocean. I had her load up stuff, and I drove her straight down the Gulf Shores for a few days. And we wound up, Maddie told us that she didn't want to have a funeral. She said, I don't want people booing over me. She says, don't you dare put me in a cemetery with a headstone where people can go take pictures. Headstone. Because that will make me upset just thinking. And I was like, no, we won't. She goes, I want to be cremated like Grandma and Grandpa. And she said, I don't care what you do with my ashes because it ain't me. She had a pretty good handle on it. And crazy thing is, the couple sitting back here had a grandson Maddie grew up with. And Dawson Brown was his name. He was Maddie's best friend growing up. And he wound up dying. Maddie always told us growing up that she had this funny thing wind up dying, cancer, got older. That I just know that I met Dawson and we were together all them years to prepare me for that. That's why it don't really bother me. That's another reason because I know where he's at. It doesn't have me that upset. So seeing all these things, there's a lot of little more details going in through all this stuff that I've talked about tonight. But when you pray, God, God does things in a mighty way that we can never imagine. He'll open doors that he wants open. He'll close doors that he wants closed. My first day when I started down here, keep in mind, like I said, my business, I played Christian music and had posters up and stuff. The Lord told me when I quit, I had created a really nice aquarium for myself. He said, "You've got a bubble going on." He said, "Put a fish in a small tank, it'll stay a small fish its whole life." He said, "It's time for you to move on." I'm like, well, I like my aquarium. Of course, I don't really want to move on. He said, "No, it's time to go." My first, or about the third day working down there, most of them guys are old coal miners, kind of rough, language, talked about. I wasn't used to it. I cried all the way home for an hour and pleaded with God. And then I pleaded with her too to let me quit and go find another job that I couldn't take it. And the Lord told me, he said, "Remember, I told you, you got to go move out of your aquarium into a bigger pond." He said, "You be a light in the world. You got to let that light shine. You can't keep it yourself. You cannot control every environment you're in." So all this stems right back to the Lord speaking into her heart, growing up, sitting in church, not even knowing why, and my dad preaching and my mom into me and all the people growing up in church. The Bible tells you, write it on your hands, write it on your doorpost, even tells you put it on your forehead. God, you were talking the other day, Adrian, about your boys worried about sports and that, what have you. As long as you keep teaching what God wants you to teach them, they're going to be all right. They will. Because that stuff will come back, get burning. Other kid, I wish she wouldn't fight so hard for it not to come out, but she's struggling. But I know it's in there. I know good and well. Even people that I've seen in my life. There was a time with my dad. He struggled with some things later on, and when he was older, and we butted heads. But when he passed, he told me that he didn't have anything to give me when he died. He said, "I'm not," and I don't want nobody looking down on my dad because I understand why he did it. Dad told me, he said, "You're not in my inheritance." He said, "You're not getting nothing because you've already got yours." He said, "What I gave you greater than anything that anybody could ever have." He said, "Your mom and I sat back and were amazed at how you have lost everything and came back full circle." He said, "And you kept the one thing out of everything you had, that was your faith." And he goes, "And God provided everything back." And he goes, "You have better now than what you had before." And he goes, "God's hand is on you." And he goes, "You have got that inheritance." He goes, "And that anointing." And he said, "I'm telling you right now, you don't need anything I have to offer you." And I said, "No, I don't." I said, "I know I don't." Just like Abraham said, he didn't want the thong of a sandal. I said, "It ain't nothing against you," but I said, "Everything I got, God provided. God has supplied all mine." That's a little bit of background on me and myself. Appreciate you guys taking the time to listen. Go from here.